You're listening to Tread Talk from Treadmill TV. Today we're talking to ultra runner Mike Cameron. He's also an author who wrote Becoming a Better Man. His organization is called Connected Men, and he focuses on giving men connection, purpose, and resilience. So let's talk to Mike Cameron. I want to give you a good introduction. So if I miss something or if I say something that's incorrect, let me know. You're Mike Cameron. You're leader of the Connected Men organization, and you also authored Becoming a Better Man. We can find you at mikecameron.ca. You're a father. You broke into the white-collar business world. You're a runner, author, public speaker, and because you had a tragic loss, you're helping other men become better versions of themselves and helping avoid future harm. Is there anything else I should add, subtract, or change in that intro?
No, I think that's pretty good.
Okay. By the way, you have a very good narrator's voice. I did the audio of your book, and for one, you avoided sounding bored with your own reading, because there's so many authors who read their own books, and by the time they get to the 3/4 of the way through, they sound tired. I think you did a good job narrating your book.
Well, you know what the trick there is a good producer, because I actually recorded it twice. So the first time I did it in my home studio and I just recorded it. And then I gave it to a producer to do his thing with it.
Mm-hmm.
And he came back and said, I think we can do a better job of this. Why don't you come into my studio and we'll do it live. So what he ended up doing was he had, I can't remember if it was a set of lights or a light that had different colors, but he had like a red, green, or yellow on there. And so he would sit in the sound booth while I was narrating it. And if my energy dropped a little bit, he would put the yellow light on just to let me know that, okay, like you're starting to fade a little bit, dude, pick it up. And then if there was something he really didn't like, he'd put the red light on, and then I'd just read that phrase or paragraph over again. So it was really cool, because you're right. I've noticed that as well. So I appreciate that you picked up on
that. Everybody starts off with quick feet questions. It's more like a fast feet warm up. So answer these questions with as few words as possible. I got all these questions from the internet. So Facebook is full of beginner runner questions. Did you run today? First 5K, that kind of thing. So these are all the questions that are asked on those forums. What shoes should I buy?
The ones that are right for you.
Why does my leg hurt?
You're running too much.
What kind of watch should I get?
Garmin Enduro 3.
How do I make my bowels move before a race?
Coffee, coffee, coffee.
Where are you running this weekend?
Hope, British Columbia.
How do I get faster?
Hill repeats and sprints.
Best running movie.
Oh, this is a tough one. Let's go Chariots of Fire.
You read my mind. True or false question, Strava or it didn't happen?
Oh, true.
How do you carry your phone when you run?
In my vest.
Have you ever done a 5K marathon?
Several times.
Does running hurt your knees?
No.
Other than your own, which isn't exactly a running book, but best running book.
I enjoyed Rich Rolls.
What do you eat before a race?
Oatmeal and banana.
Why don't you just sprint the whole time?
I've tried, doesn't work.
Do you just eat anything you want?
During? Yes, absolutely.
Have you ever won a race?
No.
All right. We're sufficiently warmed up. That was your quick feet questions. So your organization is called Connected Men. You talk about purpose, connection, resilience. The first thing that popped in my head when most people think of men's support group, have you seen Fight Club?
Yes.
Uh, I just imagine Edward Durbin hugging Big Bob and crying it out. So I think that's the first thing that most men think of is getting emotional. But what is it really like in a men's group?
Well, it's super interesting that you say that, because I mean the reality is it can be, if that's what you need. Um, and I was just talking to a fellow that's been with our group for a couple of years now, who's just going through a pretty difficult time in his life, and he was talking about how much he now has the skills to navigate that. And he was reflecting on his first day, the first time he came out to the group, and that was kind of exactly what happened to him. Is he did break down at that moment, but it was what he needed. It was a release. The reality, though, for the most part, is it's just an environment where we can actively explore what's going on in our heart. I always talk about moving from head to heart. So we have a pretty straightforward structure. It's pretty flexible, but there is a structure to it. So it's just about coming in. I use the acronym SOAR. So we slow down, we open up to whatever's coming up inside, we accept what's there, which is the A, and then the R is that reconnect with the deepest part of self, which most men tend to bury, suppress, avoid. We perform this version of masculinity that gets prescribed to us by society that we've grown up with. And oftentimes we don't have the opportunity or the space to really explore who we actually are. So again, I could go on for days about sort of what happens, but yeah, that's the reality. Is it's just, we create a space where you can practice moving out of your head and into your heart in a curious, not judgmental environment.
So you said out of your head into your heart. Does that just mean the stuff that you've been stewing on?
Not necessarily. Let me ask you, how are you feeling right now?
I mean, I'm happy to be talking to you. Work is good. Meetings with church have gone well. Feel like life is in a good spot right now.
So, and not to put you on the spot too much, but
yeah.
So what does life feels pretty good right now? Like, what does that feel like? So you kind of gave me the story, which is typical, right? So you gave me the narration of things are going well at church. I'm happy to be talking to you. So we got a little bit of feeling in there. But you kind of told me the story, the things that are happening, which I would say is more sort of head, right? But what are you feeling right now?
I guess contentment is the biggest thing going on.
Right. And so sitting with that, what does contentment feel like? Where do you feel that in your body?
It's more of a belly thing.
But how many of us actually take the time to just have that 30-second pause and say, I'm feeling really content right now.
Right.
And noticing, what does that feel like, versus, you know what, I'm up at the lake at mom and dad's, life is good, I've got a coffee going on, I'm talking to Nathan. Again, all of the intellectual things that are happening that create the feeling, but oftentimes we neglect actually sitting with the feeling, noticing the feeling, and living with the feeling. And certainly more so when they're difficult feelings. So that's what I mean by getting out of your head and into your heart.
Okay.
So with the guys, and the beautiful thing is this is really a peer-led group. So it's not just me poking at guys. the more veteran guys, the more they've been around, they start to understand this and they do it to each other. So they might challenge me and say, okay, Mike, you've just told us this story about your son, but what does that bring up for you? And then again, if I tend to flip back into another version of the story, okay, sure, that's great, but what's the feeling? And so we challenge each other.
One of the things I appreciate about your story is that after a tragic event, you didn't look to the judicial system or politicians to try to solve issues that affected you, but you took it into your own hands and asked, what can I do to make this better? Because I feel like so many people look to the government to fix personal problems or problems of the heart, when you can only do so much as a government to lock people up or punish people, but that doesn't necessarily stop something from happening in the first place. So I do appreciate that about what you've done. Jumping around my notes, one of the things that's been a catchphrase is the word toxic masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
So when you hear people talk about that, what do you think is actually being talked about? What's the actual thing that people notice that they call toxic masculinity?
Yeah, I mean, frankly I hate the term because I think it's so misinterpreted. I don't think masculinity in and of itself is toxic. For me, what's toxic is the pressure, the societal pressure for guys to have to produce, to provide, to perform, to put up these masks, these walls, to bury, suppress, and avoid any kind of emotion. I learned very early in my sales career that we buy on emotion and justify it with logic. And, as I went sort of through my sales career, that was the thing I sort of focused on. And, you want guys to buy more widgets, you make that emotional connection between the widget and your customer, and you were going to sell more widgets. And the more I sort of dove into that from a research standpoint, I'm a guy that likes to understand the why behind the what. The more I realized that, not only do we buy based on emotion, but the science tells us that emotion is the foundation upon which reason is built. So essentially, we make decisions based on emotion. Emotion drives decisions, decisions drive behaviors, and behaviors provide our outcomes or our results. And too often we try and brute force change the behaviors without going back and addressing the underlying emotion that drives the decision that creates the behavior that ultimately creates the result. And so when we talk about what's toxic for most men is not having the space, the ability to feel our feelings. That's what I would say is toxic. So it's not masculinity that's toxic, but what can be problematic is when we don't understand the underlying emotions that drive the decisions we make. Mm-hmm. And again, I think, lots of guys would push back. Yeah, but I'm not an emotional guy. I make decisions based on reason. Yeah, but it's, again, empirically, it's not true. Like the science tells us different.
Yeah, I think back in the day, what is called toxic masculinity might have just been called young, dumb, and full of bad ideas.
Yes.
So talking about being able to open up and what you just said about guys make decisions or based purely on logic, but we do actually make decisions based on emotions and then justified by logic. There's a video that went around a few months ago that really made me think about how something that Brene Brown said was displayed, in that men want to share emotions, men want to share, but often can't, especially when they're in a relationship with their wife or long-term girlfriend. If they try to share those emotions with their spouse, then they are looked down upon. And there's a video of a man sitting outside his home at the end of the day. His wife is recording the video and asks him why he's sitting by himself on the porch right at sunset. And he explains he reached the end of his wire spool after a couple of decades of using it. And it's a sentimental moment because that spool represented all the time, all the effort that he put building in his shop. It represented time that has passed since he began. It represented his journey. And his wife, who is recording him, said, "Okay, but you're late for dinner." And you see the guy's shoulders drop, you see his head drop, and he waves her off and says, "All right, never mind." And I feel like that's a pretty good representation. And it's not necessarily the most important thing, it's a sentimental moment, but she just completely dismissed it. And I feel like that's what most men face, is dismissal of their emotions rather than, yeah, I see that, or feeling heard. I feel like more men give that to each other than close relationships with women are able to give to men in that regard. Do you see the same thing? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, but I absolutely can empathize with that, and I can see that for sure. And that is exactly where I see the problem: is men don't have enough spaces where they can create that emotional connection with self, with others, and with the world around them. So yes, 1000%. And this is a conversation to have with your partner. Michelle and I, my partner, we have a thing we call strategy or empathy. And we've had this conversation. So this becomes now our common language. So if I came in with something that I wanted to share, something that was weighing heavy on me, in a perfect world, we don't always get this right with each other. But again, we've had the conversation, so we can circle it back or bring it back around very quickly. If she goes into fix it mode and I just need to express what's going on, I don't need a solution. I can just say empathy. Mm-hmm. And she understands that, okay, right, this isn't a time for strategy. You just need empathy. Or again, in a perfect world, she would ask me, do you want strategy or do you want empathy? Mm. And I can think about that, because sometimes I don't even realize that. And I can say, yeah, you know what? You're really good at this stuff. Maybe I could use a little strategy right now. Let's figure out how to solve this thing. And vice versa, because I do the same, right? She comes to me with a problem, and maybe she just wants a little bit of empathy. She just wants to get it off her chest. And I go into solution mode. And I see that a lot, because I think a lot of us guys are fix-it guys, right? Mm-hmm. Let's get the solution. Whereas oftentimes, and even for each other, right? I don't need a solution. I just need the space to be able to share my problem. But being able to have that conversation with your partner, being able to understand how to show up for your partner. But you're absolutely right. And I've seen that for sure, where a lot of guys that come to our group come because there is some challenges in personal relationships. And in many cases, their partner has said, you know what, you need to go see Mike. You need to go do this work. And then when they do, and they do start opening up, it becomes very awkward or difficult for the partner, because sometimes they don't know how to receive it. So I think there's a lot of facets to it. It's not a blame game. We all need to learn how to hold space for each other better. And yeah, the scenario you described, that's a perfect example of that partner not knowing how to hold space. And, there's a variety of reasons. I mean, maybe we've never been taught that. Maybe the partner has also had the same sort of conditioning that, it's not manly to open up and share your feelings. Right. It's super interesting, because I'm grateful that Michelle understands that and appreciates the depth of who I am. I'll give you a perfect example. Ozzy Osbourne passed away recently. Ozzy was a huge part of my youth.
Hmm.
A huge Black Sabbath fan, huge Ozzy fan growing up. I took my daughter for her 13th birthday. I took her to see Black Sabbath. That was almost a decade ago now. So he's just been a huge part of my life. So we pulled up a Ozzy Osbourne tribute, the one he did before he died, on YouTube 3 or 4 days ago. And I just started tearing up because it brought back so much for me. And, there's a part of me that felt embarrassed. I'm sitting there in bed with Michelle and I'm crying over Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell, man? But again, she just reached out and just sort of put her hand on my lap and just let me do my thing. And I just like that. We need more of that, to just allow men to feel. And the beautiful thing is when you get to that point where you can just feel the feelings, you've got a lot more control. I think so many of us think that we can just bury them, stuff them, and I'm going to put that away and compartmentalize it and control it. But the reality is it's coming up one way, shape, or form. And for me, it used to be insomnia. Like, I couldn't sleep. And I think for many men that it manifests that way, or, uncontrolled anger. So it's not about not feeling the feelings. It's not about becoming just a blubbering mess all over the place. It's about finding the appropriate spaces where you can feel the feelings so that you can, in fact, deal with them and they don't drive you. I mean, emotions are just information. And it's ridiculous to think that we would just ignore that information.
I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to clarify. The question is culture being feminized? Because you're talking about emotions right now, and typically emotional sensitivity, nurturing, and cooperation are female. Stoicism, competitiveness, provision are male. So in some ways, obviously there is a lot of overlap between men and women. Obviously, men have emotions. Obviously, men are sensitive. Obviously, men can cooperate and be nurturing, and vice versa for women. Women can also be competitive and provide and be stoic at times. One of the things that I think informs this question for me is the old curmudgeon Archie Bunker was seen as old-fashioned. He was kind of a jerk. But in a way, something that we're losing as a culture is men as fathers setting boundaries and saying, this is okay for you to wear or do or say, and this is not okay for you to wear, do, or say as my kids, or even as spouses. You can say, no, I don't think I feel comfortable with you going there by yourself, and for whichever spouse it is. Do you feel like as a culture we've lost some of that, and we need to, not only as men, be more connected to ourselves, but also still still fill that role of men and fathers and leaders?
Yes, to an extent. And again, I mean, this is such a deep question, and we could spend hours unpacking it. So, you talked about boundaries, and I think one of the biggest issues I see, and I do a lot of work in leadership as well, and talking about compassion and empathy in leadership, I think is kind of a similar thing, because there's a lot of pushback, like, well, I can't be compassionate and empathetic. But the reality is you can be compassionate, empathetic, and still have boundaries and accountability. And when we lose that, that's where we run into problems. So we can still feel our feelings, we can still be emotional, and we can still have boundaries, and we can still have accountability. So we're not talking about eliminating all boundaries and just becoming soft and squishy all over. It was interesting for me. One of the real epiphanies was I had just done an Ironman in Penticton, and I was at my aunt's place, and she had just run, a 5K race. She's 65 years old, and she talked about how she was gonna run this race. She knew she would be dead last, but didn't care. Anyway, long story short, she goes on and finishes the race. And after she tells us this story, I just thought, oh, like, that is badass, having the courage to show up for a race that full well you're going to be dead last and publicly dead last. Like, the vulnerability required. Anyways, for me, it was all about sort of redefining what it actually means to be a badass. It's not so much about, winning the race. To me, real badass is having the courage to show up at a race, knowing that you may not finish. And as we were driving home from that particular event, we had the Tim Ferriss podcast on, and he had Brene Brown on. And Tim asked Brene a very similar question to what you just asked me. And I think he framed it somewhere around, what do you think of the over-feminization of boys in our school systems? And she handled it brilliantly. She said, she goes, I don't think that masculine and feminine, are mutually exclusive. She said, and in fact, I believe that the right combination of tough and tender is the exact equation for badassery. And when I heard that, I just went, oh, boom, there it is. To me, that was the trick. It's about having that balance, that combination. So, I can cry watching an Ozzy Osbourne video, but I also just finished the Tahoe 200, right? Like, so it's not an either or. It doesn't mean that I let my kids walk all over me. In fact, the more connected I am to self, to that emotional part of self, the more I understand it. So that when my kids do something like, put the dishes in the sink when the dishwasher is right beside it and not loaded, and I lose my mind, and then half an hour later, I'm blown up at my kids, and then I walk away, and half an hour later, I'm full of shame and regret because that's not the man I want to be. When I can recognize those triggers, what happens, and I can feel that feeling without reacting that way, but still I can put that boundary on, you know what, Chris, if you don't do these are the consequences, but I'm not reacting based on the emotion. I still have the emotion because the emotion's there. It's the feeling. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think finding that right combination of tough and tender is the perfect example of becoming badass. And it's that combination of, the masculine and feminine working together.
Let's take a left turn. We talk about addiction, because in your book, which is a biography of sorts and life lessons from your story, addiction is not just a theme in culture, but it seems like there's a high percentage of people in ultra running that have had past addictions, and part of their coping, part of their recovery is ultras. This is a question that I've asked several people who have opened up with me about their past addictions. Do you think that addiction was a phase or a trial that a person needs to go through to become who they need to be? Or do you think there are ways to avoid the pitfalls of addiction and still become the person that you're meant to be?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. Absolutely. I do not think it's necessary. Again, everybody's going to be individual. Everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to have their own path. I've never had a problematic addiction, so it's a little hard for me to speak with authority about that as somebody who, again, I've had my struggles with different things, but I'm not sure I would call it to the point of addiction.
Because I guess the thing I was referencing from your teenage years was just the foolhardy teenager phase that you went through.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Um, do I think everybody needs to go through that? No, not at all. I think there's enough experience out there that you can learn vicariously. You can learn through others. You don't necessarily have to go through that yourself. But if you do go through that, I think where the important piece becomes, regardless of what your journey is, what your path is finding a way to find those lessons through those struggles, whatever that is.
Yeah, I think the best answer that I had from a friend is similar to yours. If there had just been that one friend who said, "Nah, let's not go to that party. Let's hang out. Let's rent a movie. Let's do whatever," and you can kind of skip to the good part in a sense because you don't have to go into that low point. I really thought your parents were real ones. They sent you to a penal colony when you wouldn't listen to them. Um, a lot of the values that you talked about in your book and that you're coming to really have a lot of Christian values kind of in the background, like that combination of tough and tender. I think you said in your book that you're raised in a traditionally Christian home. Do you espouse a lot of those same values that you grew up with? Do you think those are feeding into your value system till today?
Well, yeah, there's no question. Um, yeah, I mean, I am not. I would say I'm not religious today, but from a value standpoint, absolutely, that is what shaped who I am, and absolutely, I maintain a lot of those values to this day. There's no question.
Um, Usually, when men talk about men's issues, either get categorized as like either religious, or you're in the manosphere, or you're men's rights activists. What kind of, uh, I guess, what kind of sphere of influence would you put yourself in amongst?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure how I would categorize myself because I don't feel like I fit in sort of any particular one of those. And again, I think it's about finding that balance, finding that right combination of I've always joked with my partner that, as I continue to do my work, I would like to be the center of that Venn diagram of Goggins, Brene Brown, and Ram Dass. Um, for me, that's kind of bits and pieces of all of those individuals, but not sort of leaning heavy to sort of any particular one.
I've not heard of Ram Dass.
Ram Dass was an American spiritual leader from the 1970s. So think yoga, toga. Um, he has some incredible teachings. In fact, so when Colleen was murdered, a friend of mine sent me what's called a letter to Rachel, and it was a letter written by Ram Dass to the parents of a young girl who had been murdered. And that letter absolutely changed my life. There were three big pieces for me that came out of that. Again, this was a letter written to the parents of a young girl who had been murdered. Ram Dass said, is anyone strong enough to remain conscious through such teachings as you are receiving? Probably very few. And when I read that, I realized that, I had a responsibility to remain conscious through the experience that I was going through and look for the lessons. The second thing he said in that letter was our rational minds will never understand, but if we keep our hearts open, or sorry, if we, it, our rational minds will never understand what has happened. But if we keep our hearts open, our hearts will find their own intuitive way. I kind of butchered that quote.
Okay.
But that was the essence of it. Our rational minds will never understand. And I can't tell you how many times, I asked that question. Why was she murdered? Why me? Why now? Why her? Why? And as you can imagine, there is no rational answer to that. But our hearts, if we keep them open, will find their own intuitive way. That's what it was. Our rational minds will never understand, but our hearts, if we keep them open, will find their own intuitive way. And I think, in fact, he says our hearts, if we keep them open to God, will find their own intuitive way. And then the third piece, he said, now is the time to let your grief find expression, no false strength. And again, when we talk about in the context of masculinity, so many of us dudes tend to put up this false strength. We put on these masks, and just having the courage to let your grief find expression. And grief doesn't have to mean your girlfriend was murdered. It can be the loss of a job. It could be the loss of a contract. It could be, I went out wakeboarding the other day and I didn't do as well as I wanted to. We grieve in any number of things, any number of ways. But those three pieces, again, I'm kind of skimming over them, but those three pieces were game changers for me. Is anyone strong enough to remain conscious through such teachings as you are receiving? Probably very few. Yeah, so that's Ram Dass.
Okay. Can we talk about marriage?
Yeah.
Facebook always shares these, whether it's like the accountant that gets angry at his clients for being stupid with their money, or one of the ones that I've seen is marriage counselors who have very difficult clients. And part of, the men's rights activists are saying that, well, if all is equal, let's not punish a man for financially for getting a divorce. If you're getting divorced, let's split things even. But it seems men do better doing things shoulder to shoulder, digging a hole, running, soldiers fighting shoulder to shoulder, whereas marriage counseling, conversations like what we're doing right now is very face to face.
Face to face, yeah.
If we're in a marriage that is not going well, what is something that men can do that provides a way to go shoulder to shoulder rather than a face to face, trying to talk things out in maybe a way that men can't communicate as effectively? What does good marriage counseling look like?
Oh, that's a good question. First off, I'm not a marriage counselor, but I believe that if you're struggling in a relationship, the first place to look is not at the other side, but inside. So that comes back to, the old adage that I talk about often in leadership and in business is control the controllables. And in ultra running, I use the analogy a lot in ultra running. There are so many factors that you cannot control, but you can control certain pieces. So focus on controlling the controllables. And in a relationship, you are the one thing that you can control. So when it comes to how to have those conversations, it's about learning what you need and being able to articulate that in a way that is kind and compassionate, and not in it from a place of blame. And again, that comes back to understanding the emotions that drive the decision, because obviously when we're talking about conflict in a relationship, that's a very emotionally charged situation. Mm-hmm. So being able to notice those emotions, feel those emotions, but not have those emotions dictate how you react, and just getting clear on what is it I need from this relationship, being able to articulate that and setting those boundaries, and then asking the reverse. And the reality is, sometimes those boundaries or what I need from a relationship, if my partner cannot give me that, then maybe that means that the relationship has to end. And for me, that was the case. I mean, I don't know that I was as emotionally evolved as I am today back then. And who knows, maybe I could have saved my marriage. But yeah, I think being able to understand self first. So often I see a lot of finger pointing and a lot of blame, because when it is that face to face, it's a lot of, well, she does this and she does that, and this is the problem with, and always looking for that. What is the problem? I talk about, again, when Colleen was killed, I had so many people sort of surround me and pat me on the back, and they drop their head and shake it and say, something's got to change, Mike, something's got to change. And for me, that became a mantra for a while, until eventually I looked in the mirror and I said, something's got to change. And then I added those 3 words that really shifted everything. Maybe it's you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's you. Maybe you're the one that's got to change. And having the courage to be able to really drop the masks, drop the armor, and look squarely in the mirror, standing there buck naked. Who am I really? And what do I need? And how can I contribute to that? Or what do I contribute to that? I think having that courage is really important.
I think the best pre-marriage counseling is trying to navigate a canoe. That's the real test of a relationship. Who's going to sit in the back? Who's going to get upset? And are you going to get to your destination? So that's my best advice for before you get married. Getting toward the end of my notes here, but I love talking to you. The point of your book is for men to be able to show and share emotions in a healthy way. What are the first steps in gaining emotional intelligence?
Slowing down. Just slowing down and practicing the art of observation. So taking that pause, taking that breath, when you recognize there's been a trigger, that something has set off an emotion, regardless of what it is, could be happy, could be sad, could be mad, just taking that 30 to 60 second pause and saying, okay, what's coming up? And I think for most guys, starting with the physicality, what are you noticing physically, is a great place to start, because oftentimes we're much more adept at noticing, okay, I'm clenching my fists, my jaw's tight. Okay, where's that coming from? Yeah, I'm angry, I'm pissed. Okay, right, and then just again, so practicing with that, with the observation piece, slowing down enough. For me, what I think I used to do was the exact opposite. I would accelerate so that I didn't have to sit with the feeling, because it's uncomfortable. But having the courage to slow down, sit with the feeling, and get curious about it, not judge it, not try and change it. Think of that little bird flies out here and is just noticing, just observing, detached, noticing and observing. So that would be the first step. And the second would be just to accept that, yeah, this is what I'm feeling. And that's okay, because we all have feelings. And once you've done that, Eckhart Tolle talks about, with awareness comes choice. Okay, I've noticed my hands are clenching, my jaw's tight, I'm realizing that I'm really pissed right now. So what am I going to do with that? Am I going to lose my mind and yell at my son because he didn't put his dishes in the dishwasher? Or am I going to take that beat and say, okay, son, here's a boundary. If you don't put your dishes in the dishwasher, then you're not getting dessert, or you're going to have to make dinner tomorrow, or, whatever that consequence may be. And that comes back to what we talked about earlier. there is a boundary, there is consequence, and there is accountability. But I don't have to yell at you. I don't have to lose my mind, because 9 times out of 10, I think if you ask most guys, that's not the man they want to be.
Right.
And that's, for me, that's the other, a friend of mine gave me that question. He, in fact, has it tattooed on his forearm, is what would the man I want to be do in this situation? And for me, that's a powerful one. So anytime that something comes up that's difficult for me, I just ask myself that question. What would the man I want to be do in that situation? And usually you know the answer. You don't always do the action, but usually you know the answer.
Mm-hmm. Or even like, if I were watching this on TV, what would I expect a good dad to do in the show? Kind of a,
Yes,
third person perspective. Some of the best friends that I've ever had are guys that I ran with. And it's a little bit of trauma bonding, a little bit of just regular friendship, and all these other things of getting through, the miles of cross country. What's it like for adults, adult men, to make friends? Because I feel like, I see it in some family members. I see it in people here and there that I meet through work. A lot of men don't have social lives, and it's not like they necessarily need to go play, rummy with some friends, things like that. But what does a healthy adult men's relationship look like? How do you find friends? What are we hoping for?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and even I struggle with that. As much as I preach this stuff, I have to take a pause and look in the mirror, and how much do you actually practice what you preach, Mike, versus being sort of the guru or the guy that guys come to for support and assistance, and balance that with actually creating meaningful relationships. So when it comes to men and friends, I think number one, there needs to be an intention. I want to build a friendship. I want to create a friendship with whoever it may be. How do you find those people? That again becomes intentional. So going out to whatever social clubs or things you're interested in. If you're interested in photography, joining a photography club, or hiking, running. I mean, obviously the running community, that's a great way to connect with folks, but being intentional about cultivating those connections, that's a big part of it. There's a fellow that's came into my life in the last couple of years who I really enjoy, and it would be easy to just sort of let that slip because we're not geographically super close. But I make a point of, let's hop on a Zoom for a virtual coffee once a month. So I poke them every month. If we haven't chatted for a while, it's like, hey, Mike, you got time for a virtual coffee this week? Let's get together. So again, being intentional about cultivating those relationships. And then the last piece comes back to that vulnerability thing that we talked about. Being able to say, hey, you know what, Mike, I really enjoy hanging out with you. And I do plan to be a little bit intentional about keeping this connection alive. So I hope you're down for that.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of men's relationships are also based on dogging each other. It's a pretty healthy way to show emotions while making it feel like a joke.
Yeah, and there's a caution with that, because that can go too far. That can be misinterpreted if you don't necessarily know the other guy's raw spots, his triggers, and you poke something that is problematic for him. You may push him back, and he may never share that with you.
Right.
So
like making a mom joke if his mom had just passed away and you didn't know it, kind of a thing.
Exactly. Yeah, there's all kinds of things. We never really know what other people's, I call them raw spots.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Sue Johnson had a book called Hold Me Tight, which is a great relationship book for men and women. And she talks about raw spots, understanding your partner's raw spots. So, for me, when Colleen was killed, I'd sent her a text in the morning. She didn't reply. Sent her texts most of the morning, sort of leading up to when I found out. Didn't reply. And then eventually I found out that she had been killed. So for me, a bit of a raw spot is not having a response to a text. So having Michelle, my partner now, understand that when I text you, if you don't reply to me for 4 hours, my mind goes to some pretty dark places very quickly, which is ridiculous, but that's my raw spot. So she has always been very good about doing her best to say, hey, I'm just going into a meeting. I'm going to be out of touch for the next 3 hours. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not, and the challenge with that one is one of her raw spots is a dude trying to control her, because she had some very controlling relationships in the past. So we had to find that balance of, okay, Mike, I get that, but understand when you need me to respond, that feels very controlling to me. So finding that balance. So again, for guys, the joking thing is great. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever, because you're right. We absolutely rib the crap out of each other. And that can all be in good fun. But I do believe that needs to be balanced with some vulnerability and care and caution.
Yeah. So we can end on a little lighter note. After your Tahoe 200, that's been your most recent ultra?
Yes.
Your hair looked good down afterward, started up. So tell me about, ultras can be one of two things. If you're a competitor, you can obviously, you have the strength to finish, but you're also competing to try to get as high of a ranking as you can. And I understand those guys, but I also never want to do that in my life, as far as not only running 100 miles or 200 miles, but also trying to be one of the fastest people to do it. Just sounds so miserable to me. So what was your Tahoe 200?
Yeah, well, first off, I will never be one of the fastest guys. So that is out the window for me. And it was interesting because we were actually listening to I think a running coach or somebody on YouTube. And Michelle and I are quite curious about sort of coaching styles. And so we're always very intrigued to watch some of these guys. And this guy lost me in the first paragraph that he opened up, because he said something to the effect of out there competing with all these other people. And I just thought, oh no, you're not my guy at all, because I'm not out there competing with other people. I'm competing with the course. I'm competing with myself. I'm having a hell of a lot of fun with a whole bunch of other people. So for me, that's what it's all about. It's not about competing with anybody. Yes, I absolutely want to do as best I can. And Tahoe, that was my first 200. So there were so many lessons learned. I finished in 96 hours, 23 minutes. I probably could have shaved 5, 6, maybe even 8 hours off my time, knowing what I know now. I was, I was too stubborn to take a pacer.
Yeah.
And that cost me. That last 30 kilometers, 19 miles or whatever it was, I got off course because I was just so tired. I lost a bunch of time, and that was just dumb. So a lot of lessons learned. So for me, it's not about competing with others. It's about competing with the course. It's about competing with myself. And how do I improve, and what lessons can I learn?
Well, is there anything you'd like to make sure I know about you or about your organization before we say goodbye? We've hit the hour mark.
No, I don't think so. I mean, Connected Men, worth checking out. It's free. It's something I do because I care about it. I think it's incredibly important. You know, you touched on this early. Lots of folks talk about, well, men don't want to talk about their feelings. And I think that's bullshit. I think if you give us the space to express our emotions and share our feelings in a safe environment, you can't shut them up. And that's been my experience. So
the organization is Connected Men. The book is Becoming a Better Man. And the website is mikecameron.ca. Is that accurate?
yeah. Or connectedmen.ca.
Connectedmen.ca. To the best of your knowledge, that is accurate. Cool. Well, yes. Mike, thanks for making this time in the middle of your vacation. Hope you can enjoy the lake. Do you still fish?
We're more water sports than fishing. So okay. I got to wake surf yesterday. So that was a lot of fun.
Good. Well, thanks again. I'll be looking forward to seeing you more on the interwebs and seeing what other journeys you get to go on.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good talking to you.